My name's Daisy Scalchi, and I'm the BBC's Head of Religion and Ethics for Television. I've been a commissioning editor at the BBC for around 4.5 years, and my focus has been on religion and ethics that whole time, but I took up this dedicated post last summer, and I'm really delighted to be there. I thought it might be helpful to say a little bit about how we work at the BBC before I talk in a bit more detail about our approach to the religion output, alongside what some of the recent content has been over the last year or so, and also I'll share a little about what we have coming up. So I work very closely with my equivalent colleagues who many of you will know, Tim Pemberton, who's the head of religion and ethics for radio, and Aleem Makboul, who is the religion editor for news, both of whom are here today. And we work very closely together. And between the three of us, we are across most of the religion output across television, news and radio. But of course, you can find a lot of other content across the other platforms like Children's, BBC Learning, Bite Size, Sounds, our local radio, our colleagues in the nation. And we all speak regularly, and the idea is that we are working in a very joined-up way so that we can ensure that religion content is reaching as many of our audiences and listeners as possible, from the youngest through to the oldest, in as many different platforms as possible. I'm going to speak in a little bit more detail about what we've been doing with the television content recently, but before I do, I thought it might be useful to clarify what we mean when we're talking about religion as an area of programming. As we know, the word religion instantly means many different things to many different people, both positively and negatively. It can be quite a wide-ranging headline and difficult to pin down or define in any singular way, and that is, I believe, its very strength. Because when you get behind the word religion and some of its inevitable associations, it can take you into exploring life's biggest questions and understanding the human experience, both for us as individuals, but also in relation to one another. It really is a subject that taps into the personal, the existential, the cultural, of course, the theological, the metaphysical. You get the idea. It's therefore, I believe, an extraordinary resource, and it's for everyone, whether you are religious or not. When it comes to the programming, I think it's better thought of not in a silo and something slightly over there, but something that can be part of any content, any other style, any other form. And you can see some of the examples of that in these clips here, these slides. So this is just a selection of some of the programmes we've had across BBC One, BBC Two and BBC Three over the last year or so. And I think you can see there's quite a range of style and approach as well as subject here. And I'll talk in a bit more detail about a couple of these titles. So Two Daughters, which was presented by Stacey Dooley. I don't know if you've seen it, but if not, I recommend you have a look. It's on iPlayer, as are all of the other titles. And this followed the story of Mina and Chris Smallman, whose daughters were tragically murdered in North London in 2020. And the film was an extraordinary, honest and raw portrayal of that family's grief and how they were trying to come to terms with what had happened. It was also a film about institutional racism. And as a retired archdeacon, it was a film about faith. The film explored how faith, the role that faith played in Mina's life in the aftermath of really the unimaginable. So while the film wasn't about faith and grief, that was an essential layer throughout the whole film. We also had this year a 5-part series called Love, Faith and Me, which went out on BBC One. And the idea with that was to take universal themes of family and love and to explore that through the lens of faith. And so each film followed a different family or individual as they struggled or came to terms with a particular issue or something that they were wrestling with in their lives. And that series had a dedicated social media campaign to support it. So cut downs and short reels were posted on BBC's social platforms like TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. And that did really, really well. The single film, The Highs and Lows of a Kosher Marriage, for example, got over 1.1 million views on Facebook alone. So we know that that was really, really reaching a wide audience in a different way. We also had a single film earlier this year called Hamza, Forgiving the Unforgivable. That went out in January and again is also on iPlayer. And that followed the film of a young Muslim comedian and YouTuber called Hamza Arshad, as he struggled to come to terms with forgiveness and the idea of forgiveness in the aftermath of a brutal attack on his cousin some years earlier. And I'm going to show you a clip of that in a second. So in this clip, Hamza has gone to hear a talk by a man called Tariq Jahan. His son, Haroon, was killed in the 2011 riots in Birmingham as he was trying to protect local shops. And at the time, his father, Tariq, made the headlines for speaking out against violence and for encouraging a peaceful response to the violence that was happening. And ever since then, he's gone around the country giving talks about a non-violent approach, even after something as dreadful as that has happened. So Hamza here is, he's just heard this talk and he's now catching up with Tariq after hearing it.
My cousin, who's literally like a brother to me, he was attacked by a gang. He was very lucky to survive.
Have you forgiven though? No. Let me ask you this.
Yeah, go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
You ever made a mistake in your life?
Yeah, of course.
Do you want forgiveness?
Yeah.
For those things you did?
Yeah. But but at the same time, there's a difference between me, stealing a 20-piece sweet and me stabbing someone and trying to kill them.
They're both wrong. In this world, God gave us the laws.
Yeah.
Don't change the laws to suit yourself. Leave it to him. The same thing I've done with my life. The man that killed my son, in this world, if I met him, I'd hug him and say, I forgive you, son.
But if someone comes up to me and say, no, you deal with it, you have to forgive them, I'm like, I don't need to forgive them. It's kind of like what you're saying, though. That's up to God. But I wouldn't hug him.
It's understandable, you know. There's you're still a young man.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of difficulties with my son. He's 34 now. When his brother was killed, I couldn't control him. You know, he's the kind of guy, he picked me up and threw me out the way because I said to him, no, you're not going out. He said, no, I'm going to kill this guy. I'm going to find him, I'm going to kill him.
Tariq's son's reaction sounds familiar, but I wonder if he's managed to find forgiveness in the decades since his brother's death.
Thank you. So, while Hamza's faith was a really integral part of the film, it wasn't a film about Islam and forgiveness, although that was referenced throughout. It was a film about forgiveness, regardless of your religious or secular viewpoint, and whether or not asking for forgiveness or giving forgiveness is always the right thing, and what do you do when you want to, but you find that impossible. So as well as some of the content that I've been looking after as well, we do have religion and religious themes and characters in lots of other places, such as the dramas and comedies at the BBC. There's Black Ops, which many of you may have seen, EastEnders, there's a new series of Time, which has just been commissioned, all of whom have characters for whom religion is a very important part of their lives. There was the brilliant Louis Theroux documentary earlier this year where he interviewed Stormzy, and that was one of my favourite programmes on television this year because I think the way Stormzy talked about his faith and how that influences his life and his music was inspiring. So there are plenty of other places where, as I talked about before, religion is really woven through other content so that it's not in a silo over there, but it's found in a number of different places. Really showing, I think, that religion can be part of the wider conversation. So, as has been referenced, I think, earlier on, where we are at the moment is a really exciting time for religion and ethics as an area of programming. As we know, the UK's religious landscape is changing significantly, and we are also seeing that the appetite from audiences for programming in this area is as strong as ever. It's really important then that we continue to reach audiences by bringing in the people who we know already want to come to a religion content, as well as appealing to new audiences who may not think that religion is for them. So we do know there is a dedicated audience who want to come to religion programming, and we want to make sure that we're continuing to deliver the range of subject that they might want to expect in the range of representation. Series like Love, Faith and Me is part of that strategy. We also had 2 other series this year, which I think you can see one of them here, My Life at Christmas with Sally Phillips. We also have My Life at Easter with Sally Phillips. And those are really a very straightforward format. Sally sits down for an hour-long conversation with a well-known person, both from religious and secular perspectives, to talk about what informs their belief systems. And it's all through the lens of Christmas and Easter, marking the milestones through their lives. And those are a really simple, but I think relatable hour of programming where you get a real insight into people's lives in a way that feels warm, often very funny, and often quite moving. We've also obviously still got Songs of Praise, which continues in Rude Health, and there's a dedicated team there who work tirelessly to deliver weekly episodes of Christian worship. And then we have Sunday Morning Live, which is our live topical and current affairs programme on BBC One. That goes out 24 weeks of the year and will look at topical and current events through a moral and ethical lens. And we, of course, have the returning brand Pilgrimage, which, if you haven't seen, is on BBC Two in the spring each year. We've just had a 5th series, and that brings together 7 well-known faces following a religious route, a different one each year. And those people will be from both secular and religious perspectives, but along their journey, they cover some of life's biggest topics, as well as trivialities. And the idea is that you really get to see different belief systems talking around the same subjects, both the commonalities and also the differences between them. And that does bring a good, hefty, loyal audience every year. So there is, as we know, also an audience who might not see that religion content is for them. And these might be people who have ticked the no religion box on the recent census. And we know from a lot of the work that's being carried out about that group that they're a very nuanced and complex group of people, the so-called nuns, and they don't necessarily see themselves as belonging to any one particular belief system, but they will nevertheless often be warm towards or interested in the conversations that a religious framework might bring. Some of the ways that we're focusing on that audience is, as well as exploring universal themes that might be relatable to religious and secular audiences alike, is by bringing big name talent, extraordinary access, or cutting-edge technology to the programmes. So recently we had a film called I'm an Alcoholic, Inside Recovery, and that was unprecedented access to a UK AA meeting. And for the first time, cameras were allowed inside. And in order to hear the testimony in as emotional a way as possible, the production company used deepfake technology to change the contributors' faces so that they could share their experience down the lens at us. And that way we didn't lose some of the emotional connection to the stories that perhaps more traditional anonymization techniques might have brought. We also had another single film, again with extraordinary access, The Mormons Are Coming, and that did exceptionally well with a younger audience, and iPlayer was where many of them found that single film. That also had a dedicated social media support, which I think helped bring a wider audience to that subject as well. And so really, all of this, I think, points towards the range of tone and form that the content can take, with the aim of trying to relate to and connect with as wide an audience as possible, again, across as many different platforms as possible. And it can also be through tackling difficult subjects, or celebrating faith, or exploring hidden worlds. So where are we going next? Well, we are constantly keeping the audiences and the listeners at the heart of what we're doing, and we'll continue to do that. There are a number of ways that we work in that way. We have the dedicated team of people I've already mentioned, and we work very closely together, and those people are from a variety of faith backgrounds and secular backgrounds, but all of whom are passionate about keeping religion at the heart of the conversation. We also know, as I've mentioned, that audiences are accessing and learning about their content in a plethora of different ways. So it's really important that we harness our social and digital resources to stay at the heart of that conversation and to make sure audiences are learning about our content. We work really closely with the audiences team as well, so they are brilliant at sharing data and insights as to who is coming to the programmes and how those programmes are going down. And we also speak regularly with faith groups and faith leaders and individuals to try and understand where representation is working and where it can be improved. We know we don't always get it right, and we certainly don't please everybody all the time, but we really are listening, and we want to continue to improve the content so that audiences and listeners really feel that religion content at the BBC is representative for them. So just before I finish, I'll give you a couple of details about some of the titles we've got coming up. In the autumn, there'll be a second series of Scotland's Sacred Islands with Ben Fogle. So once again, he will travel across some of Scotland's most glorious islands and landscapes, looking at the Christian history in that part of the world and how that history is still so relevant for communities living there today. We also have a couple of films I can't say too much about because we haven't announced them yet, but one is a single film with a well-known, well-loved Muslim comedian, and we'll see him exploring his faith in a way that we have never seen him do before. And then we have another single film about death, which, while that sounds like it might be a bit depressing, I think it will actually be really fascinating and exploring some of the questions and some of the fears that many of us have around that conversation. To conclude, I would say that while we are religious or not religious, or even interested in it or not, religion is an extraordinary resource. And connecting us through universal themes that resonate widely, like love or death or purpose, meaning, grief, this can help engage viewers, both secular and religious, with the content and bringing a greater understanding of faith and belief to as wide an audience as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daisy. That's really fascinating. And I'm just marking off the programmes I've seen and the programmes I clearly need to see.
Well, if you've seen any of them, I'm really delighted.
Oh, gosh, yes, absolutely. I loved The Mormons Are Coming, particularly.
Good. Yeah.
I'm not sure on the age profile. You said it was young people, but anyway, well...
As broad an audience as
Thank you
possible,
very
that's
much.
what we're aiming for.
Now, listen, we've got about 5 minutes, and I've got a few things I wanted to ask you, but actually, I think I want to see if anyone has questions. Oh, hello, lots. Why don't I just run up? There we are. Let's be energetic about it. Come on, Hannah. Sort yourself out. Right, I'm going up here first. Oh, this is fun. Must do this more often. You had a question.
Hi, I'm Hardeep Singh. Thank you so much for a very thorough presentation. My question, I think you've touched on it slightly already, but it's around the census and the demographic changes. So we've seen that Christianity now is a minority religion in this country, and one of the biggest groups, second to Christianity, obviously, are people with no belief. How is that going to change your commissioning agenda moving forwards? And I was also very curious around how you define the word community leader, because that can mean all sorts of different things. And if I take my community, that pretty much means everyone with a turban and a beard. So it would be very helpful to have some understanding and insight there.
Thank you, Hardeep. Two very good questions. I think to take the first one, part of what I was explaining there, I think, taps into that in order to make sure we're still speaking to the audience, many of whom might consider themselves not part of a religion or with a particular religious perspective, we need to think about what is it that they want, because we know they're not all hostile to religion or don't believe that religion has a value. So while we need to continue to make sure that we have programmes about faith that might read, religion on the nose, so to speak, we also need to make sure that we're broadening that conversation out so that people might come to the content and be able to explore some of the themes or questions that might typically come up in a religious programme but don't necessarily have one particular religious perspective represented. So I think the short answer is it's about broadening out the content, and that can be done through, say, a big name talent or access to a particular community or organisation. So something like AA, for example, that didn't actually have a huge amount of faith representation in there, but it's an example whereby had some of our main characters had different faiths, or indeed one of them sort of was religious in spirit but didn't have a particular belief system, I think that's an example of how people can talk about a sort of secular spirituality. This is probably just where my language is failing me slightly to encapsulate what we mean by community leaders, because you're right, it's so broad. And I think there isn't one, it's not a catch-all term that's aimed to represent one particular person we will head to in any one particular community. I think it's about speaking to different groups, leaders, individuals who might point us towards somebody who they feel is a spokesperson for that particular local community, and that could be at a micro level or at a macro level where there is somebody who represents the umbrella organisation, or there's the umbrella spokesperson for a number of different people. So I think we need to do both. But again, there's always room to speak to more people. So if you have anyone particularly in mind, I'm very keen to hear of who they might be.
Nikki, could you just...
Sorry.
Thanks. No, you're fine.
Thank you. Hello, I'd like to know if there could be a program featured about mental health in the sort of a drama format, or would that be too sensitive?
A mental health programme in the sort of religion space?
Yes.
I think that's a really important conversation to see across the board, and religion and ethics needs to be part of that conversation as well. So you're right, and there often will be a focus on that particular key moments in the year, which I know we never want to restrict anything like this down to one particular week, but mental health season, for example, is a good opportunity to highlight where religion might step into that space. So programs like Sunday Morning Live will often have dedicated episodes or features to that subject and exploring that through a religious or a faith lens. But again, there's always room to do more. It's such an important part of the conversation, and I think it needs to be represented throughout.
Yeah, great. Was there one more question? I'll give you my microphone.
Thank you. My wife and I followed the Holy Land and us. Really, we enjoyed every episode of it. There's a question about, as we're changing as a society now, I begin to feel that the thought for the day is just a short period. You have the Jewish, the times of Passover, but I just feel now that perhaps we've got to look at a different way, as this gentleman was saying, to say how much Britain has changed. Occasionally I pick up, if I'm wide awake on a Sunday morning, I'd like to see perhaps an odd, in Edward Surton's programme, just a clips sometimes of something. I accept that it's Sunday and everything else, but I would feel that, and I have listened on occasions, and it seems to be 99%, and I feel that that period, perhaps an odd 5 minutes, when we get, might be just a thought for the future.
And thank you, first of all, for your thoughts on the Holy Land, because I'm very glad you'd seen it.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And do you mean sort of wider representation in programmes like Thought for the Day, so the 5 minutes you would like to see extended?
Of course, you're television rather than radio, but how much do you have to do with, do you have anything to do with the radio side of things?
As I said, really closely together. So it's, these conversations are being had between all of us regularly. And, I agree with you. I'd like to see as much representation as we can possibly have as regularly as possible. Whether that's on a Sunday or a Saturday, I think there's room to include different religions, different belief perspectives on all the different days of the week.
Our time is up. Daisy, Scalchi, thank you so much for joining us, Daisy.
Thank you for having me.